Hello and welcome to my workshop. So a few years back I made this beach cruiser out of a Jeep JK. I've learned a lot since then. I want to take some of those learnings and put it back into this. I want to make a new top for it, clean up a few things, make some repairs, and I'll get this thing back on the trail. Alright, so let's get started. Although it's only been a few years since I built this, my style has changed dramatically. I was just dipping my toes into the custom scratch-built world with this. Not only has my style changed, but my attention to detail has improved. It wasn't that I was purposefully doing a bad job in the past, I just couldn't see how it could be done any better. The first step is to strip down the truck and get all the removable pieces off. One issue that I had right from the beginning was keeping the doors shut. As a matter of fact, the passenger door had been superglued shut out of frustration. I also had an issue with the topper. The construction method allowed for the material to curl over time, and the gaps were just way off. I knew there would be more things that needed addressing, but I was going to figure out the rest as I went along. One of the coolest parts of this build are the wooden sections in the cargo area and under the topper. I used a dollhouse flooring which came with a paper backing attached. The planks of the flooring were cut apart and glued in place to make these wooden structures. What I didn't realize was the glue holding the paper was water soluble, so the paper remained firmly attached but the wood separated from the paper. I like the shape and look, so I pulled a few planks off at a time. The paper was cut away from the joints, and the pieces were glued back together. This time it is glued wood to wood with CA glue, so there is no chance of it separating if it gets wet. Since I only pulled a few at a time, the overall shape remained the same, and soon enough all the pieces were fixed in place. Something else I learned too late is that all these pieces of paper would stick to the floor and make a right mess of my shop floor. I'm still trying to figure out how to get rid of them all. The next thing to tackle was the doors. I pulled off the door panel, front and back, and stripped away the mirrors and handles. I just needed to lightly scuff up the door, since the paint was still in good shape. The rear end has a centerpiece, which on the original has the word Chief embossed. At the time, I had no way to make this, so I just made a shape glued in place that was close. Now that I have a 3D printer, I made a piece so the section needed to be cut away in preparation for the installation. The B-pillars were affixed to the topper, and I needed to cut them off. I struggled with getting the plastic to cut and resorted to brute strength. What I forgot was the roof was screwed to the pillars, and the screw head was covered over with filler. I'm hoping my styrene saw is not too badly damaged, but my guess is I'm going to need a new blade. As I mentioned, my style of building has changed greatly since this Jeep. I started rebuilding the topper by cutting some MDF to the general shape. I will make a mold and pull out the shape from my vacuum former. The entire topper will not fit on my machine, so I carpet taped the rear section in place so the sanding lines will match up. I have a shape to follow from the pictures of the 2016 Cherokee Chief concept. However, I'm needing to match this up with what I already created. So I just need to slowly work up to the final shape by marking material and sanding back on the benchtop sander. Once I'm happy with the shape, I add styrene strips running acrossways. This forms the side-to-side channels, which Jeep refers to as a French bread roof. The transition from styrene to MDF will need to be smoothed out, but once that is complete, the mold will make a very convincing part. The last step is to sand the part so the glued on pieces flow with the curves of the topper. You can see what the parts look like directly from the vacuum former. To release them, I slowly start cutting closer and closer to the final shape. The first step is to rough cut out the parts. Then you look for any hard edges where the mold can be used to ride the blade against. If there are none, the shape is cut as close as possible and the edges are cut back after pulling it from the mold. The last step is to start fitting the two pieces together. I try and cut relief channels in the mold, which show up as depressions on the final part. This gives a good visual indicator as where to cut. A few passes with 80 grit sanding block, and the pieces start to come together. I first attach the part with a solvent glue and then back it with CA glue. The CA glue is cured with a spray and acts as a clamp until the solvent glue has time to cure. I use set screws from drive shafts as pins to hold the topper in place. The threaded side is put into the topper, leaving just the pin exposed. A corresponding hole is drilled in the body and offers a very positive hold for the topper. Before, the B-pillar was attached to the topper, but it was made in a way that the topper was permanent. Since I want the topper to be removable, I decided to glue the B-pillar permanently to the body. With some of the rough work complete, I turned back to sanding. I wanted to repaint the door panel and dash, but didn't want to sand it since all the texture and detail would be removed. Luckily, I have a lot of Jeep parts, so new ones were pulled from my parts bin. After the doors, I focused on refining the seam on the topper. This was done by spreading a little Tamiya filler and then sanding back. I try to keep the Tamiya filler to a very thin layer and use other stuff for big gap filling. I wanted to make sure the paint was consistent since the blue and white are very light colors. This is why I sprayed on primer to all the pieces before wet sanding them with 400 grit paper. I've been using Molotov for my chrome, but wanted to try out mirror. It is similar in look to Molotov, but looks much better when spreading with a brush. Molotov has to be flooded on and cannot be fussed with after applying. The mirror seems to look better the more you work it on the piece. I was able to pull out the gauge stickers from the old dash and transfer them over. I have found that small scratches are just too hard to see with primer, so I always spray a thin layer of body color on to help highlight the areas which need a little help. After getting all the panels fixed and sanded back, I was able to get a final coat of body color. This gets sanded to 600 grit once the paint has time to dry. The tape is applied along the top of the body line in preparation for masking off for the white color. The last step is to spray the 2K clear coat, but I wanted to keep the seats matte, so they were masked off. Yes, in case you were wondering, there is something weird on my right hand. It is a splint, as I broke a tiny bone in it and sprained my wrist. I'm doing okay, but as they say, the show must go on. The sliders remain the same as before, but received a freshen up with the new body color and 2K clear coat. I had a Hawaiian printed fabric, which was printed on my inkjet, on the original version. However, much like the wooden planks, the glue used was water soluble. This time, I chose to use spray adhesive. Normally you spray both sides and put them together after allowing it to tack up. I didn't feel I could successfully pull off taping the seats, so I just sprayed the fabric and put them in place while it was still a little wet. The fabric should allow the glue to flash off and will give a more permanent bond than the glue I used before. The cotton fabric works really well for this, but frays terribly when cut. I solved this by applying a liquid stitch to the edge with a toothpick. The pieces are placed on the seat and smoothed out. A seam runs down the middle, and the fabric is pushed into that channel. It is amazing how that little detail makes it go from just a piece of fabric on the seat to looking like it's actually part of the seat. The cargo area wooden pallet is glued in place using E6000. Just a few dabs along the rails is all that is needed. The doors get attention next, with applying the handles, mirrors, and panels. I almost ended up in the same boat as before, with the door not closing properly. It seemed to be working before I painted it, but with the thickness of the paint being added, the door was just a little too tight. Luckily, I was able to modify the door in a way that couldn't be seen and could easily be touched up later. It seems I always forget something that causes me moments of fright. I forgot that the roll cage, which was originally more vertical, no longer fit under the more slanted forward topper. Since the tolerances are very tight, I need to solder the roll cage in situ. Nothing like having a scorching hot torch near a newly finished paint job to raise the heart rate. There are still a few loose ends to finish up, but the last major piece to finish is the striping down the side. Originally, I designed this striping way too small. This time, I went with a much larger, and it looks so much better. Pieces were placed down the body and trimmed where they cross panel lines. It was a lot of fun going back to an older project. Unfortunately for me, this one is not staying. It has found a new home, and I can't wait to see it on the trail. Many fun projects coming up, but until then, I'll see you on the rocks.